welcome to Megan's Mystical Mashup. I'm Megan Rounds, your host, and Megan's Mystical Mashup is a show that is ultimately a conversation with me and a guest about life, the universe, and anything in between. Okay. Today's guest joined the Lightworkers Lab this past May and spends, I think that's what he said, yes, this past May, and spends most of his time in the main lab and the lab light room. His expansive and versatile gifts include all of the clairs: clairsentience, claircognizance, clairvoyance, and clairaudience. Actually, there may be some in there that I didn't mention, but those are the main ones that I'm aware of. As well as lesser known but super powerful gifts of light language and Seidr. I had the opportunity to experience him speaking light language during the Bliss Retreat this past year, and it was amazing. It really was. It was super cool. He resides in Florida with his puppy, Thor, and is in the process of building his own spiritual business while also pursuing a degree in psychology and working part-time as a barista. His great-grandparents were Catholic mediums, and he comes from a Christian background with a mother who loves Buddhism. Please give a warm Lightworker welcome to the wonderful Christian Cuna. Hi!
Hi!
Welcome to the show!
Thanks for having me.
Oh, very much my pleasure. I'm so glad you're here. So, quick question, and it was such a loose connection between that and the last story I read. Did you make the connection, Christian, or did anybody else?
I got it.
What? What is it?
The theme of magic, and then kind of like the Lady in the Lake and the King Arthur. Yeah, I like that.
Yes. Well, plus I had looked up another story with that, or another version of that same story that was written locally, and they called the that Viking girl finds Viking sword, although I don't really know that it's a Viking sword, but it's like, oh, that's interesting, because that kind of comes from one of the time frames of one of your gifts that we'll talk about in a little while.
Okay.
So it's like, but oh, Christian, nice haircut, Christine says. So,
oh, thank you, love. I appreciate it.
You're looking very dapper. So, we have talked, Christian and I, periodically over the past couple of weeks, here and there for different reasons, almost exclusively tech reasons, more recently. And so it looks as though everything is working well. But just so you know, we did experience some technical difficulties during our practice runs. If anything happens, you'll know why. But I anticipate smooth going tech-wise, since it seems like we've worked it all out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Christian, I like to start every show, every conversation with a big question about what was your spiritual journey or your path to your life, to the Lightworkers Lab. And you can choose one or the other, or intersperse the two together, whatever you desire.
Since my path to the Lightworkers Lab was so recent, I think, just going from the beginning of time to where we are now would be best.
Excellent.
So, yeah, like mentioned before, my great-grandparents, my grandparents were all Catholic. My mother was Christian. She had a very, very strong love and connection with Buddhism. So it wasn't like it was like so overly religious in my household. It was very modern day Christian, very like loose, and which I was actually very, I would say, very strongly tied to that. I loved it. I've always loved religion. It's been part of my passion to study religions and understand other cultures. I don't like knowing so little about one area. I like to know about the world in totality. So I like to kind of learn everything. And so that was kind of my background coming in. I was born in December 21st, so Yule.
Cool.
Which is the longest day, the longest night of the year. That's when it's the first day of winter, but it has a lot of like interesting magical aspects to it. And when I was born, my natal chart, almost every single planet in my natal chart is Aquarius.
Oh, wow.
So I guess it kind of came out like how I interact with other people. Like, I I grew up in the late 90s. So, the kind of kids and the people that would surround me, there would be certain interests, certain brandings and stuff like that, that would not necessarily be. I always wanted to be the outsider, but also wanted to be an insider at the same time. So it's like I
I hear
didn't
you.
want to be everyone else. I wanted to be me, but I wanted everyone to want me and accept me, kind of thing. So that was kind of like how I kind of grew up. Um, I didn't really go through my spiritual awakening until I want to say 2014, 2015. Um, so what had happened was I had to do a paper back in junior year. This paper was on my family history. So I didn't know much about my family history. My grandfather from my mother's side is adopted, and then from my grandmother's side, I pretty much knew everyone, and I didn't know much about my dad either. So through some talking around with family members and stuff like that, I found out that my great grandparents this whole time, knowing them because they're still alive even now, they were mediums, and they never said a word. They had their own little circle things when no one was home. They had like some other family members that they would invite. Um, I'm Cuban, so I have a lot of like family members that are into like I think I have some santeros in my life, in my family members. So that would be like I wouldn't know what you would call it in English. Is like I guess like a witch, but like a man that's a witch,
Oh, okay.
or like so
Wizard,
it
maybe?
yeah, something along those lines.
Okay.
So I had a few of those in my life, and it was very strange because my mom was telling me stories about it, and she explained to me that when I was born, um, before her pregnancy, she developed diabetes. She developed what do you call it? Chicken pox and all kinds of things, and they all went away after I was born.
Wow.
Um, and when I was born, I think he was like my great uncle or something like that. He said that um, in English translation, it's this child has a lot of light. There's something special about this child, and that's kind of like that was kind of a weird thing that she told me. So it leads on to how it all kind of comes together, but that was kind of a big thing. Um, and I'm just kind of like, okay, so if my family line has been kind of psychic and all this whole time, what have I been missing? What have I not been doing right? So I start my research, and I find out from looking back even more that I have Spaniard and Portuguese in my bloodline, and I come from like a line of missionaries and mediums. So it was kind of weird, like just kind of finding this out for the first time. Um, so that was a good paper that I did.
I'll bet. Did you get an A?
I don't know. I don't remember.
And who cares, really? It's the
Yeah.
content that's important.
I loved the realization. So in that very same, it
Yeah.
was either in that very same year or I think a little bit before it, I met a friend of mine. Um, I had this PE class that I shared with her, and well, she had PE class. I did too. We had two different teachers. Her teacher got fired, so then her class was merged with mine. So we ended up meeting in the same class, having the same class together, and that's how we met. And she's the one that got me into tarot cards. She's the one that kind of directed me to. I think my first teacher kind of was like Teal Swan, and like chakra work and stuff like that. So that's kind of like where I began. She kind of got me started and revved up. But then after I found out about my family history, that's when I was like, I need to know everything. So I did like a crazy amount of research on angels, a crazy amount of research on crystals, on chakras, and I guess my first original goal was to, I guess, become psychic because I wanted to know what that felt like. I wanted to know where my family was coming from in that sense. So it was kind of like almost like an ancestral thing, kind of pulling me in that direction. Um, then what happened? What had happened after that is not too long after, I had joined this blog social media thing called Tumblr, and they have a side to them that's known for like magic and for spirituality and like all these new age things and things of such nature. Um, but there was always, I didn't actually ever know if magic actually existed.
Mm.
Um, it was, I think, because I had always, back in, believe it or not, middle school, that's when I was looking up things on magic.
Wow.
Um, there was an there was this anime, because I'm very interested in like Japanese cartoon art and things like that. Um, Called Betrayal Knows My Name, and in this show, it's all about King Solomon and his work, and like they use a lot of historical content and references, and so that got me thinking: what if some of this was true? And I actually researched it, and there's this book called the Book of Raziel, from Archangel Raziel, and it was a book that was supposed to be given to Adam, taken away by the angels that didn't want him to have it, and then given to King Solomon afterwards.
Oh.
So it was this really interesting book. And I mean, at the time, as a middle schooler, I'm seeing these strange, huge, circly symbols of like all kind of ceremonial magic, and I'm like, I don't know what this is, but it looks awesome. Um, um, so, and weirdly enough, I was very interested in like card games. So back in middle school, um, and it was through learning how to shuffle from that card game that I know now how to shuffle tarot and oracle cards so easily. So it applied to that at the same time. So it was very interesting. Um, and then, so it was kind of like through Tumblr, I think everything kind of began in a weird way. It's not a place you would think you would find spiritual growth or development. Um,
No, it's interesting. What's the name of that group? Do you remember it?
it's not so much groups. It's like everyone has their own account, and it's all a bunch of different blogs.
Oh.
And it's kind of like this. It's kind of like almost like it's kind of like a fusion of like YouTube and Pinterest in one. It's very interesting. But that's kind of how I grew as a person. I came across a few people that were very interesting. So at that time, I started the blog all about angels,
Mm.
and I think that's exactly what I called it. All about angels. Um, and I had such a strong focus on all the archangels, um, and it was a really heavy, deep work of mine, for the most part, beyond anything else. Uh, and then working with chakras, working with crystals, that was like my three main things before anything else in my path. This was at the point where I was diverging from Teal Swan, coming into new kinds of other different teachers. Um, and later down the line, I met this teacher. Her name is Athena Parakis. Um, she is the founder of like Sage Goddess, and she's where I really developed and honed my craft a lot more with like crystals and all these kinds of understandings that I've come to, and still very much is the teacher for me. Um, and so what had happened was, in this app or in this social media that I kind of honed myself in, I met a few people, and I was just starting to get into, I think I had finally made it to like third eye work,
Mm.
finally, after working through the lower ones. And I was focusing on like trying to figure out past lives, and because I was so interested, I was like, what? Like, I want to know these things. Like, there's got to be more than this, kind of thing. Like, I was not at that point. I was not satisfied with how much I've done. I was trying to. I was like, I know there's so much more to this, and like, I think life was so simple back then, just exploring, before everything else. Um, but as my third eye opened and I began doing some like third eye work, it wasn't, I don't think, what started it exactly. I talked about in a live in the lab light room where I learned that there's a chakra back here called the mouth of God,
Oh
and
my gosh.
it's above the neck and close to like the base of your skull. That area is, from what I've learned, is how you access past lives, and it's connected to the ears as well. So what I was doing, because I wanted to do deeper throat chakra work, I actually had a crystal on the front of my throat and one in the back of my neck. So I'm thinking that that may have triggered the past life memories, because when I try to purposely look for past life memories, I would not get a lot. I would get like little phases and things like that. But now they come to me almost like scenes of a movie and like clips. Um, and I learned that over time, a lot of these memories, these past lives, they came to me through triggers. So if I remembered how I pronounced something back then in a past life, if I remembered someone's name from a past life, and I spoke that name, I get a whole scene just pop right in front of my eyes, and like how that, like what it felt like, like who I was when I was with that person, or what have you. And Tumblr was a really weird place. I think about 4 or 5 people from past lives through there, um, and some of them have become like my best friends. So I've had so many memories, but I'm gonna try and not go straight to the past lives just yet, because I think there's a little bit more to it all before I jump onto all the crazy things.
Can I jump in with a question?
Sure.
I just the mouth of God chakra, that area, that is a problem area for me. That part right there, I had no idea there was a chakra there, and it's. How did you learn? Where did you? Was that in Tumblr that you discovered that, or how do you? I would love to open it up, and now I know what I'd be, potentially in for if I did, but it's almost like it's been screaming to open up because because it literally does, I mean, aside from the sound it screams. It's where all of I have neck issues there for no real explanatory reason.
Yeah. It kind of, I found it in like YouTube first. It just seemed kind of abstract at first. It didn't like really make sense to me. I didn't really get to put it all together until recently, actually.
It's fascinating.
So that chakra, what's happened with me with it is that when you're trying to open it up, you'll get headaches, maybe some strain or whatever. And once it fully opens, that's when your past life memories are almost like flow. It just comes to you. And depending on your clairs too is how you experience it. I started off very clairsentient. And that's still my strongest dominant clair. It's developed to a point now where I could feel other people's emotions as my own, so I have to be very careful with who I'm dealing with, because I've had an instance where I've had someone attracted to me, and I took it as I was attracted to them as well, but rather I was picking up their emotions as if it was mine.
I hear ya. What a realization when you figure it out. It's like, oh, I thought that was me. Oh, never mind.
It was strange. And then I've always been kind of very strong visually, like clairvoyant wise, I suppose, because I've always had a very active imagination. And so I always could see like visuals and stuff like that, but like actual visions was kind of coming after the clairsentience. And then cognizance has always been there kind of with clairsentience, but it's so subtle you don't really notice until you recognize and have the awareness of that even being a thing later on. And then clairaudience has been very more recent for me, like back 2017, late 2016. So it's been a ride.
I'll say, definitely. Did these different clairs, did you know what they were when they came? Or was it really after the fact that then you started noticing, hey, that's what that was?
I wasn't very well informed that everyone had different gifts. I assumed that everyone had the same thing. So I was just like, oh, I'm supposed to be hearing and seeing spirits. I don't know why I'm not getting anything. And that really bothered me. I was like, okay, so what am I doing wrong? And at this around this time, I had met two of my friends from like past lives and stuff like that. One of them, her name was Grace, and the other one was name was Ethan. Grace and Ethan um, were tied with me for like multiple lifetimes, not even just one. And they had crazy gifts. My friend Grace, she has the ability not only to astral travel but bilocate. So that means like she can be talking with you, having a full-on conversation, but part of her consciousness is also in the astral. So she could be exploring the astral realm while she's having a conversation with you.
Wow.
And it like dumbfounded me. I'm just like, I can't even astral travel. Like, I need to learn this.
Does she seem like she's there when she's talking to you, when she's also in the
Yeah.
astral? Okay, so it's not like she's just kind of, hanging out but not really present.
And
That's
then
super cool.
my friend Ethan, his gifts were even more amazing. If he got angry, he could make it rain.
Wow.
He could also he couldn't really control it yet, but he'll have like sporadic moments of telekinesis where he literally flung a teacup across the room by accident.
Ooh.
So I'm like, I see these people with these crazy gifts, and I'm just like, okay, where's mine? Can I get a refund? Because this isn't working. So I think it didn't really change until I really dropped the comparing to other people, and then learning eventually that we all are very unique. No one has the same gifts. And I think Tio Swan taught something about this. She said something like, what happens is that you pour your gifts, like you'll have your dominant clair, and as that clair reaches its maximum potential, it will outpour onto all the other clairs. And once all those other clairs are open, those psychic receptors that we have, so like our ability to see, hear, feel, and know spirit, become individual gifts, which ties to like the light language and the things like that, which I'll be explaining later, where we each have our own individual gifts. And this is kind of how it happened with like Ethan and Grace, where he could control weather. She could too, which is, I'm just like, I don't know. I
Wow.
can't. So it was kind of like through these perpetual things that made me feel like, oh my God, there's so much more than we even can possibly imagine. But it was really when I stopped and comparing myself to other people that it really settled in as my own individual gifts. I saw my first internal vision as clear as day. I saw like this most beautiful man, like if it puts the Mona Lisa to shame. Like it was so pretty. So I later found out who that was, but so essentially I'm doing this connecting, meditating, and I see this man. He sits on this like really high chair, and his legs are crossed over each other, and he just kind of looks down with this long flowing black hair in a ponytail. And he looked Japanese, and he had this komodo on in white, and he just kind of almost looked like judging eyes looking down on me, but it wasn't. It was more like it felt kind of like almost like a trigger, like a reminder to something, like it was stirring something later on, which I did find out later.
Do we get to know who later then?
Yeah.
Are you gonna? Okay, good. There's going to be a reveal. Good.
And then it was kind of Grace and Ethan who kind of taught me about magic existing, and I was just like, okay, so why can't I shoot a fireball then? So that was kind of like my mindset. I'm just kind of like, okay, why can't I, like summon a flaming tornado with the snap of my fingers? Like, I don't know why this isn't a thing. It was explained to me later that it's more of like a law of attraction kind of thing. So it's more of like a good explanation, or how I define magic is it's the use of natural forces to deconstruct or reconstruct. So if you're trying to construct something or deconstruct something, it's using those natural forces. And so natural forces would be like earth, fire, water, air, or like light, darkness, like little like attributes and stuff like that. So that's how I've kind of learned it to be. And the thing is, all these things really do happen, but it's like the deeper aspects of magic, which seem kind of fantasy-like. That's kind of what happens in like the astral realm. It can't happen here on 3D because it can't. That level and intensity of energy can't be grounded or solidified to be something solid because the energy moves too quickly.
Sure.
And so there's people who shield their auras in different colors and rainbows and whatever, and most clairvoyants that are external can see that. So there is an energetic aspect that does happen, and we can't always assume that the imagination does not mean it's not real.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned, kind of all these qualities of magic, and I kept doing my research, kind of, I guess, being guided by these two friends of mine for a very long time. And that's kind of when things started kicking up with past life memories.
Wow. That's a lot. And I know you're not even done yet. It's like super duper cool. Once you stopped comparing and your other gifts began to open, were you seeking certain gifts to explore further at that time? Or did they just start popping up for you and where you're like, oh, that's a thing. Okay, who knew?
It kind of, I think I was still on the high road to try and hear guides, and like hear, because I was getting the visuals, but I wasn't getting the auditory, and I'm like, that's the one I wanted the most. But then I guess how I met that need was through my claircognizance. So I started using the claircognizance for like channeling and like automatic writing, which is like, written forms of channeling. And that's what I did originally, because I first learned about it, through, I think, a series of people. There's this YouTuber called Nikki Sutton, who is a really wonderful person for like the spiritual awakening journey and stuff. I wish I found her first, because she was the most clear and concrete of all the other people that I've seen getting to where I am. So I wish I saw her first, but I saw her like later on, like in 2016 or something like that.
Did that help clarify things for you then?
A lot. Especially with all the spiritual awakening symptoms, with like the ringing in the ears and all that kind of weird stuff. I thought I was opening up clairaudience. I was just like, why can't I hear yet? Like, I hear ringing, but I'm not hearing spirits. And then someone tells me, there's internal clairaudience and then there's external. And then at the same time, you may hear their voices or you may hear your own. And I'm just like, damn, that's very confusing.
Yeah. How do you know? You have to be really familiar with your own voice, inner voice.
Yeah, I've been starting able to discern recently. I'm still developing it though myself, but it's been interesting.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to think about that, because I definitely, it's been the hardest thing is recognizing my own voice versus others, but I can sometimes tell the difference, and it's usually where it enters.
What they'll do for me is they'll give me a word in English I don't know. So they'll give me a really complicated word that I actually have to look up like in the dictionary or Google. Like recently I got the word do not circumvent.
Oh, sure.
I'm just like, what the hell is circumvent? And I was trying to figure out where that was. There was that, and then all kinds of other words like recant. There were some crazy ones. Like, I would have to look it up, but
was that during their channel then, when you're channeling them, that they include those words, or is it just this word pops into your head out of the blue?
Yeah,
circumvent
on its own.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly. I'm just like, okay. But it'll come like little phrases. It's not usually just one word, unless the word itself represents an entire like sentence. So there was like this one word. It was just like, it literally meant not focusing on the future and focusing on the present. Like that was in one word explaining all of that I got, and it was just like, Okay.
Now, my guess is that some of the people watching who I know to be into words are going to start wondering what that word is. So you may see in the comments later some of the words that, is it this? Is it that? Because I know my head's going there, but I'm not going to let it. So, okay. Well, okay, so then you just, I'm trying to think of where to go. I mean, I love what you said
Oh,
about the
I got it.
imagination. Oh, okay,
I
you
got the
got
word.
it. Awesome.
Uh,
Okay.
Contingency.
Oh, wow. Okay. Contingency or contingent? Contingency?
Um, uh,
I'll have to. Okay.
oh, that goes in
Okay,
reverse.
that's right.
Okay.
It does, but I can read backwards. So,
Contingency.
okay. Wow, what an interesting word. I know it as an alternative. Like, um, yeah, that's weird. Okay, I'm looking at looking at my laptop. It's like, okay, cool. Wow, I just love that these words pop into your head. That's very neat. And then you're supposed to figure out what to do with them. Okay. It's like a
Sometimes it's a
game.
little, sometimes it's a little bit more cryptic, and I'm not meant to know until like later on. Um,
Is
it's
it
very
one of
interesting.
those things where you have the word and then it pops up in regular life somewhere? Like you're walking or you're talking to someone and they say the word? No, it's,
I'm
oh,
just like,
wow. Wow.
I'm like, I didn't even know it's a word.
That's just, it sounds like a pretty fun game. As long as you feel confident once you get the message that you got a message.
It's usually like
Otherwise,
it's like in the shower where I get these words, and I'm just like, okay,
I find showers to be really beneficial. First of all, to releasing stagnant energy, but also to receiving new energy. That's where I
yeah,
get really awesome ideas. Ones that if I'm trying to solve problems, they usually are resolved when I'm in the shower. It's amazing. I don't shower more often in a day. Like 4 or 5 times would be great because I could definitely use that guidance, and it's easier for me to get it there than in dry land, I guess. So, okay, so you talked about a lot of the things that we may otherwise consider to be imagination can also be real, and that it sounds like a lot of your path has to do with recognizing the capabilities, the true capabilities we have that a lot of us have been taught don't exist, and so it almost sounds like you're on this exploration, this adventure of discovering new and different and unique things that we can do that aren't really well known to be gifts that we could have.
yeah. I think like my whole path really was on matters of like discernment.
Mm,
So it was kind of discerning, imagination versus reality, and then realizing that reality, even in itself, is so thin, and like our concepts are so small in comparison to how much is out there. It's
mm.
crazy.
Yeah.
Uh,
Uh, Plus, realities differ from person to person as far as how they perceive it and everything else. And there's a collective reality that's kind of big but general because there's so many different nuances in there that each of us um, uh, believe in, that we filter
yeah,
through. And it's like your reality is different than my reality, who's different than their reality. And so,
exactly.
yeah. Well, so to say more about discernment and how you've gone about doing, what does that mean in terms of your life path?
It feels like it's been all about learning that um, I know more than I think I do.
Mm,
Like trusting myself and what I receive, because we're often challenged with things that seem outside of our reality, and then we wonder if it's true or not. And I've been in this constant place, and I still have it to some extent where I have to kind of seek someone else when I need to be objective.
hmm
But for the most part, I've been better each time as with practice and with time. But from like discernment, it's really that how it was explained to me. Um, it's kind of like almost like a riddle, almost how it was told to me. because my friend Ethan, he is very, very close and very connected to this goddess. This goddess whose name is like Hecate. She's the goddess of like magic and like crossroads. And he would often be like a conduit for me to communicate with her. And she supported me a lot on like my past life memories, making sense of things and stuff like that, and like towards my beginning of stuff. And she told me when I had asked her about my issues with discernment, she said that it was through trusting that you find yourself knowing more information to be accurate. By you trusting what you receive, that's enough to know that almost all information you will find is accurate. And she kept emphasizing that you don't want to look outside yourself for answers, because the one person that has the most answers is yourself. And most of us don't really know how to do the, like maybe body pendulum or like muscle testing to figure out like yes or no answers. Or, and then I've learned that more recently that everyone has a different way as well how they receive answers from their body or from their internal guidance system. So like Lisa Robinette here on these lives, she gets truth chills. Yeah. And I'm just like, oh, wow, I need some truth chills. That seems a lot easier to identify.
I love that she gave a name to those, because I get the chills and I never really thought of them as truth chills until I heard her say that. She's here today, by the way. Hi, Lisa. And
you need a t-shirt for that, Lisa.
No kidding. That would be awesome.
So for me, it's more subtle. It's like this warmth in my heart, and it expands out through my chest. And when it's like a no, it feels like a tightening, a heaviness, and almost like this electric static throughout my chest. And that's kind of how I've been able to discern a little bit more easily for me, but everyone's different from what I've learned. And honestly, there's no point in comparing yourself to anyone else because it's just so different. Take it from me.
I think it's really helpful to know how it is for different people, because I think, at least for me, coming into this journey, this path of self-discovery and understanding my skills, my gifts, I always thought it had to be one way. That this way that I'd heard about is the only way. And it's just amazing how many different ways. I mean, you're right, everybody's unique. And where everybody says that there's a gut thing for them around intuition, for example, for me, it's my throat. My throat is the truth monitor, both for me trying to tell myself something that may be false, but trying to convince myself that it isn't, or somebody else talking to me. It's just, and if people can see that chakra when I'm talking to them, they'll probably see it change and evolve as I'm, receiving that information. And I never trusted it. I just always felt like I was being strangled for, I don't know, because my throat chakra was closed, and now it's like, why am I feeling that? Something's going on. Okay, what am I, what's false here? So anyway, thank you for saying that. That's, I think that's a really, really important point for anybody who's watching this to remember, is that what our gifts show up very differently between us. And sometimes they're going to be similar to somebody else's, but sometimes they're not. And I really love the idea of that discovery of whatever my gifts are unique. And maybe there are some things there that I'm not aware of because I've never heard of them before. And so how can I discover that without relying on pre-existing information about it? But then, of course, there probably is stuff out there.
Sometimes we don't find, there's gifts out there that like don't even have a name.
Yeah.
I'm sure that people have and stuff like that. Some of the, like light language seems to be a more recent thing for people more than before. And I guess I should just talk about my light language journey. So
I was going to go there. Yes.
So what light language is to me, how I define it, is it's the accumulation of your soul's memory of all the languages it's ever spoken. So this will come in like the forms of tonalities or actual phrases and wordings from other lifetimes. This may be earthly lifetimes, this may be ethereal lifetimes, but it all kind of anchors through from the heart chakra and comes out in a way that you can't understand more so logically, but rather through like your empathy or through your clairsentience. So it's like understanding the feeling and by understanding the feeling. That's how you get the meaning, not so much cognitively. And it opens up people to a lot of like attunements, like clearings, and it, it's helped me a lot on my path. But I've always kind of been able to do it, even since I was like a child. Um, Even before like all these developments with my gifts and stuff like that. I would get like little phrases like I remember I used to say when I was like back in like middle school, I would say aru deme, and then I would come up with all these like weird phrases and stuff like that, and I thought it was just my imagination.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and it expanded out when I saw on like I think it was like a first few YouTube videos on like light language that were put out there, and it was explained. I was like, oh, so that's what I've been doing all along. I should probably utilize this. So what I do personally is I just set an intention for what I want to happen. So whether that's I could use light language for manifestation. I could use light language for healing and clearing things, banishing spirits that are not needed or wanted in my space. And actually leads to a story of like I have like some paranormal stories with that where I saved of my friend's life because of my light language. So it was like it was Tumblr sketchy. um, so we had created a coven between me and my two best friends, and I had invited two other people in that I kind of knew well, and they have like a good vibe. So I was just like, okay, why not? I think I should have discerned a little better that time, but it was okay. One of them was completely fine. She was normal, but I think she was a little bit of like a sheep, so she'd kind of just follow with whatever the other girl did. Now, this other girl, she seemed fine, normal, whatever, but then she was saying how she had like spirits around her, and they were like after anime characters, and like they would like be talking with her, and they'd be like her best friends or whatever. And I'm just like, okay, I hope you're okay, but we'll leave it at that. And she got weirder and weirder and weirder and a little bit like psychotic. But no one really picked up on it. Like she was wearing a mask the whole time. And I remember she called the spirit Leon. That was like the name of one of these anime characters from like Fairy Tale. If for those of you who do know or don't. But like, so Leon didn't really like me at all. And he couldn't touch me. So he went after my two best friends. He couldn't really get Ethan. I think he got like scratched or something. But then with Grace, she was messaging me, but it wasn't her. It was saying things like, "Oh, why couldn't you protect me? Oh, why couldn't you save me?" And it was just like, I'm like, "Who are you? Like, are you okay? Like, what happened? Like, are you something from my past life? Are you like okay?" So I felt kind of like a pity. I was just like, "Oh, is that okay?" Like, "Oh, I'm not gonna hurt you. What's wrong?" Like, and then it changes its tone like that, and then it's just like it gets nasty. And then Grace kind of comes through for like a second in like her text, and she like is asking me to help her because the thing is like strangling her with her pendulum. And so I flip out, like not I wasn't scared for some reason. I was more like angry.
Yeah.
I felt like this like righteous rage kind of stir in my chest, and that's kind of when I spoke that like light language, and it was gone.
Was that the first time you had done it? Or did you already know?
First time banishing something with light language.
Okay. Now, how did you know it was Leon?
Um, it was like through. That's what she called him. I know that really wasn't his name. But then I later found out that this was like some sort of like entity from like outside the multiverses that wasn't like really supposed to be around. Like it knew more about me than I knew about it. And then that's kind of how it. Oh, and it was through that entity I found out my name, like my soul name. It told me who my name was.
Wow. So it knew your soul name.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was kind of concerning.
Yeah. Well, especially when that is the first you've heard it or heard of
Yeah.
it, you know.
Well, he didn't say the full name. He knew like the nickname I went by that everyone like would call me.
Okay.
So I guess now jumping into past life memories. So I had a lot of support from Hecate, kind of directing me through that. But I didn't really get into anything around the gods or anything like that, like anything beyond like, I mean, how I see deities, I see them as multiple expressions of source, but individualized, you know, kind of like us, but with that omni-dimensional power and stuff like that in their own individual realms and spaces. Because, you know, from learning about the astral and stuff like that, we find that it's not just like a heaven and hell. It's way more expanse and more diverse than that. And for a lot of starseeds, we know that with, you know, the galaxies and stuff like that. For many of us, where we originate from other star systems and stuff like that. So Hecate, she kind of guided me and explained a lot of things. So I didn't really know my full soul name, or like, we learned this from Trisha Carr at the Bliss Retreat, that we have a lifetime between lifetimes. So that when we pass, we actually return to this self. And this is our core self. This is the self that we always return to between every incarnation. That's what I consider my true self to be, because that's the one I have the most memories and past lives of. And that's really, I would say that's our lifetime or our true self, where we collect all the memories and all the lessons from all other lifetimes and anchor it into that one. So that's how I consider it to be. So what I had learned was through I started connecting with gods and stuff like that. I was always interested in mythology, like my whole life. Um, I don't know if I actually believed it to be true or not till later on, because we learned in like history that these were actually like, it was kind of like the religion of those time periods, like in ancient Rome, ancient Greece. They believed that and they knew it because this is all channeled information that they wrote down. And same thing with the Nordic traditions with the guy who wrote the the Eddas. So that was his name was Snorty or something like that. I hope I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but he wrote the Pro Edda and Poetic Edda, I think it was called. So it was literally poems that had hidden meaning and insights in each of them that explained the stuff on the Norse gods. And I remember this was back in when I was taking chemistry. That I, instead of actually paying attention, I would just read on Norse mythology. And this is where I got connected to Norse mythology and all these other forms of mythology. I think, in a weird way, it's always been anime. So there was another anime.
Good.
It was about, it wasn't so much about the actual storyline or the theme, it was rather the references. So they had gods like Apollo, they had a god Tsukuyomi, Amaterasu, which is like Shinto gods and goddesses. And like from all pantheons, and it was all gathered in like one show. And a few names came out and popped out to me: Balder and Tsukuyomi. And Tsukuyomi was the one that appeared to me in that vision with that man sitting in the high chair. That's who he was.
Okay.
So he came to me before I even reached out to him.
Wow.
Um,
Wait, so did you know, so because you had that vision of him and then you saw it was this an anime show? It sounds like, not a
yeah,
book. Okay. So
it's
then
like
you
a
saw,
series.
okay. And then you saw him and you then knew who it was. Did you have like an aha moment around that?
Um, I didn't really know who it was right away because, you know, they look very different from the anime depictions. So it would be completely different. But they were like, if not, I think they were even more beautiful than the anime depictions. But Tsukuyomi is the Shinto god of the moon, and he represents the
Oh,
moon.
Oh my
and
gosh, that gave me truth chills seeing everybody else that's having them. Because you and, being born on the longest night of the year, um, that connection just seems really strong to me.
wait, that's just the beginning.
Oh, of course.
um,
I love that about you, Christian.
so I'm okay. So the first lifetime that I ever really experienced or got to know about was about this part of myself that was my core self. So, um, because Ethan is so multifaceted, he went astral traveling, no, lucid dreaming,
Mm.
and connected with Balder for me because I wanted to see and understand this energy. So, Balder explained to me that what he understood about who I was that I was a watcher.
Mm.
Now, watchers are basically angelic princes. So, most people know watchers as like the Grigori, which is like those fallen angels, but that is not necessarily the case. Watchers would be like Archangel Michael, Archangel Uriel, Archangel Raphael. Um, those are specifically our 200 watchers who have fallen, not the other, infinite amounts of angels that we can't even comprehend how many names there is. Um, so I was explained that I was a watcher, and then Hecate later on explained who I was in a sense. But the pieces really didn't come together until I knew that name. Once I found out that name from that entity, that's when I really know who I was.
Ooh.
Um, so what happened was once he called me Abel.
Abel.
So
Abel.
Like Abel and
Like
Cain.
Abel. Okay.
So Abel was what, but like the emphasis on the A, but almost like AH.
Mm.
So Abel. And that's when I said that, I think the first few times I saw this vision of like, it looked like this temple and it was like with this like chrome red over these like statues. And I felt like this huge wave of like intensity and like strength
Hmm.
that I have not like known before. But then I got a memory of there's a Norse god named Odin.
Mm.
Odin's the god of like wisdom and war and poetry and inspiration and magic. And I saw a vision of what I looked like back then. I had oh, should I bring out the picture?
Sure, if you have it.
Do you want me to bring it real quick? I have it
Sure.
right here.
Why
Okay.
not? Okay, I hope all of you are finding this to be as fascinating as I am. Christian and I have talked about a lot of these things. Not all of the stuff that's coming out today, but it's just, it's just so amazing.
So I got an Akashic. I knew someone that was really good with Akashic record readings, and they're an artist. So they did an intuitive drawing of my soul self.
Cool.
So this is what I looked like back then.
Wow. Yeah, I love that's just I can see that. I mean, I can see that in you.
The there's I There was like, and then I remembered how I had such a
Hmm.
strong love for gold,
Mm.
whites and silks. Like I remember the sharpness and the clearness of my blue eyes. I remember like the platinum blonde hair and all the markings on my body, and the wings. Like it was very intense. And so, what in that vision of me and Odin, I was kneeled down,
Mm.
almost like kind of like out of like respect, but kind of like, oh, I just came back from a mission. Here I am, kind of thing. And then he said my full name, which was Abelios.
Abelios?
Yeah, Abelios.
Mm. Wow.
So when I said that name, that was that was it. I remembered so many connections. I remember now what heaven looks like. I remember what so many realms look like. I remember the connection I have with Tsukuyomi and everyone else. It just all came together with that name.
Wow.
And that was just
That,
the first lifetime.
oh my gosh. I mean, seriously, when you get this information, I hope you're not driving or anything because it's so intense even just hearing about
I've
it.
gotten it when I'm driving.
Oh no.
Like it's crazy. But thankfully I'm going straight. I'm not
That's
going.
good.
I'm not turning or anything. But like, it's just like I like
Wow.
space out into like this whole scene.
I'm sure you're quite protected when it hits you too, so that,
Yeah,
you and everyone around you is safe. But wow, how intense, these realizations. Oh my gosh. So that's the first lifetime. How
yeah.
many have you had? Do you actually know the number?
I don't know how many. I know. I remember about 7 or 8 lifetimes.
Okay. Wow.
Um, I do know how old my soul is, though. I have like a good. Um, so back in like Atlantis and Lemurian times,
Mm.
um, a little bit before that, um, it was definitely before humanity, though. It was
Mm.
kind of like the early stages of Earth. Kind of that's when I was like created. Um, and so I recently
Mm.
more so learned that my soul is a ninth dimensional being,
Wow.
but the expression of the ninth dimensionality isn't carried out here on Earth. So like my higher self is ninth dimensional. So if like, and if you don't know where like what the ninth dimension is and stuff like that, Leah Jackson did a wonderful thing on explaining the dimensions in a very clear way. But that's kind of like where my soul resides, ninth dimensional. And what I've learned is that angels don't really incarnate on Earth, and mostly souls from like sixth, seventh are like the closest to that are able to still come on Earth. So what was explained to me later on was that my soul has gone through so much evolution that it's created itself to be like a hybrid of many things, enough for it to incarnate on Earth. So
Mm.
it was kind of like I had so many pieces of so many different things I incarnated, but my soul literally chose to do all of that in order to become human, so that I could experience the opposite.
So it was like you went through that as training.
Yeah,
And then you graduated and you got to come
yeah.
here because you wanted to.
So one of the first lifetimes I do remember, besides that angelic lifetime, focusing on like earthly timelines. I was the high priestess of Atlantis.
Wow.
Um, I forgot what his name was. I think it was King Atlas. I
Mm.
remember King Atlas. I remember the fall of Atlantis, and I remember what Lumerian looks like. This is also where I met Grace, my friend of mine. Remembering her back, she was the princess of Lumeria, and it was just kind of all these wonderful things coming back, and like all these like I remember like how there was just like random crystal pillars through walkways, and all of this like emphasis on the element of water, and like just all these like sacred pools and temples. Um, and I remember during the fall of Atlantis, I was given the duty to give the 12 keys of Atlantis to different people throughout, I guess, the continent, to bring back that consciousness for Earth when it reawakens, to from this ascension period that we're in
Mm.
now. And I didn't remember that. I didn't recognize that until sometime this lifetime. Um, the Atlantean High Council like came through, like channeled through me, and like I didn't even know there was an Atlantean High Council. They just kind of came through, and they said that I had one of the 12 keys within me, and that it was in my duty to return that key to Gaia. And then when all the 12 keys are gathered, the consciousness that was lost from Atlantis returns to humanity.
Wow.
So I'm like, what's all this prophes- I guess,
Professorial?
yes, professorial.
Sure.
I'm like, what's all this like prophecy things? And like, I'm like, I don't, I'm like, for, originally I'm just like, oh, I'm just a boy. Like, and then all these memories come back, and I'm just like, okay, I'm definitely not even human. So, uh, and then my most recent lifetime, before this one, I was Jeanne d'Arc or Joan of Arc. I didn't really remember anything from that lifetime until I learned that her name, Joan of Arc, was not how it's pronounced in French. When I pronounced her name in French, that's when I remembered everything. But I always had like this extreme love for France and Paris since I was like a child, and I even tried to study French in high school. But it was like when I came to the realization of who I was that once I realized I was Joan of Arc, the love for France and Paris left me completely. That like
Wow.
obsession with like wanting to go there and learning French and everything, it left me after I remembered.
I love that, because I have a fondness of France too. I've been to many places in the world, but I haven't been there. And I've wanted to go, but for whatever reason, I've just had opportunities to go elsewhere. I also studied in high school, but that wasn't the time for me to study because all I remember is some phrase about going to the beach with a guy named Guy. Guy. It's like that I memorized. Nothing else. I can count a little. But what I think is really fascinating is how your interest resided. It went away when you no longer were seeking. I mean, maybe you didn't even know you were seeking that information about that past life. And that's really interesting to me when I think about the places that I'm really interested in, and whether that might happen for me as well. I think for me, something like that happened with Russia, except it wasn't Russia, it was Ukraine. And I had a chance to go to Ukraine, and I went to this church, and I walked in the church, and I knew I had been there before. And then I read some of the things about history, and it wasn't very happy. But I used to read Russian novels. It was like Crime and Punishment, and all the Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, things like that. I just always that's what I did for fun when I was in my early 20s. That was that's what I did for fun, and I never really understood why I was so interested in. It was always like the worst of Russian history. Really, it was like famine and pain. But what had happened in that Ukrainian church is that people were locked in there, and they had like and I may be getting the story wrong now, but they were starved. Like thousands of people died of starvation there. And after that interest in Russia, it wasn't like I have a disdain for it. It's just that I'm no longer attached to it in the same way I used to be. So it's really fascinating to me, that connection that I hadn't really thought about before. Just cool. Okay, so the last life that you remember before this one was Joan of Arc.
Yeah.
And so what I want to make sure we have time to talk about, and we only have about 10 minutes left, because this is super fascinating. I know I'm going to have you on again, the show, because I know that there's a lot more we could talk about. But say just a little bit about Seidr.
Okay, so
Or a lot in 10 minutes.
I didn't even get to the whole story about how I connected with Freya.
No. Oh yeah, and Freya. Yes.
So, oh God, I have to go way back. Okay, so my friend Chloe, the one that I met in these PE courses and classes, we used to go to these full moon drummings at night at the beach on full moons.
That sounds wonderful.
We used to do it like every month or something like that. And one of the months, it was a lunar eclipse, a total lunar eclipse at the beach, with the ocean water warm.
That sounds so amazing.
So I head out there. I had just recently started my work with the goddess Freya and connecting with her more and understanding her more. And I did like a little thing where I have this house key, because I didn't really have the crystal collection I have now. But she had these pendant that had this key that was almost like in a necklace. And I used that, and I just kind of offered it to her, kind of a way of tethering her connection to me a little bit more. Left some offerings, whatever. And as we're leaving the beach, I turned back around to look one more time at the scenery, and what I saw was something different. There was this black door that was just in the middle of the sand. And then behind the black door was like this intense white light. Like it was like almost like a solar eclipse in the form of a door at the beach. And I look at it, like my jaw just drops and I'm just walking towards it. And as I'm almost about to touch it, it vanishes.
Oh, wow.
Um, so I'm just like, okay, I don't know what that means, but I guess I have a really interesting life. So I start trying to Google what a black door means, trying to figure it out. Um,
I got Door of Perception. I got Carlos Castaneda as soon as you mentioned that black door and Doors of Perception. That
yeah,
doesn't mean that's what it is, but that's what.
it felt like a threshold was crossed, and then that's like where now it's like two realities became one kind of thing for me. So this work with Freya, it didn't really start until I made this oath to her. So I didn't even talk about any of this. So going back a little even further than that, due to like a lot of past experiences of like loneliness and like separation and stuff like that, I had a lot of resentment to like God or like the creator and stuff like that. And it was actually like through like paganism that healed that relationship too, because I had that better understanding and higher perception that made me open myself up back to like, I guess, the source of it all. In essence, and plus the past life memories also adding onto that. But essentially, I made this oath to her that I thought to be her like priest. And she bound me to that oath. I felt it like to my core what that like it was just like whatever I said, she's just like done. It's sealed. And like you just feel it reverberate through your entire body, and it was just like okay. And then ever since that day, I've been led to all kinds of people connected to her or Odin that are all connected to her either from past lives, are incarnated Valkyries, are people that followed her once upon a time or that are close to her, seeking a stronger connection with them. They've all come to me one way or another. It's been really weird.
Wow.
Even my first client of my business was connected to Odin.
Wow.
So that's kind of, and then what happened is that she taught me how to do Seidr. So what Seidr is, it's a form of, it's kind of like a form of magic, but it's more so like a shamanic trance kind of journey. So this was more often done by women than men. And what they would do is they would go into this trance state, and they could see like the webs of fate. So like all those cords that connect us to all people, places, things, and events across like all space and time, I could see all those cords in my mind's eye. And it's almost, I had to learn how to astral travel first, because there's an aspect of astral traveling that goes with it. So I extend like almost like my ethereal hands from my body while I'm seeing all of this, and I could move all the strings however I want, or add new systems and new streams. So I could literally manipulate certain areas of life very easily. But it's actually a lot more complicated than that, because there's within each thread there's more threads and more threads, and how each thing's interwoven is very complicated. So it's not a cognitive process at all. It's more of an intuitive aspect. So it's just like you'll know instantly what you need to move. It's not so much about like, oh, I'm going to give myself $1 million in this life. It's a little bit different than that. It's kind of like you know what you need to touch. And some of the cords they'll appear black when you need to cut them out. That usually means something or someone is toxic in your life, or they'll glow like purple or neon, and like it, and then you can like weave them all together and make different things. It's very interesting.
It sounds a lot like neurons, like what my understanding of neurons. So it's like a fractal, almost like repeating patterns, and then it gets bigger and bigger, and you can see this massive, kind of like the strings to the world, or the universe even.
It was like a network kind of thing. And I've asked her before, I was like, oh, could I use Seidr to like help the collective ascend or whatever? And she told me no, that this would require mastery of the skill. to even be able to attempt something like that, because I'm assuming it's just a one big ball of yarn with the
Yeah.
collective. So, and I already know how complicated it is for just one individual doing it for myself or one other person. I can't imagine doing it for like a whole group or like community setting.
Man, that just, I mean, makes me want to take this in a whole other direction. For those of you who have watched Thread Theory that I've done on this day, or, the first Thursday of the month previously, this ties in so well to that. So I could have even called it that. And Tina said the spirituality of string theory, which I also totally, this fascinates me to no end. And so I'm curious so you got all of this from Freya?
Yeah, for the most part. So what happened was, I'm through Tumblr. This
I'm
thing
going to
has
Tumblr.
So I met a Shinto priestess. She's a Makoto. That's what they call the priestesses. She actually channeled Freya for me. She gave me a long list of prophecies and all kinds of channeled information from Freya for me, like for the next couple years. I still have it, and that was written back in 2015.
Wow.
But Freya said that she was going to guide me to how to learn Seidr, and she explains that this is very important for humanity's development and where it's going to go when in this ascension period in time when a lot of people don't know what to do or that they resist guidance. I will kind of be that one to light the way, kind of thing.
So you're going to be a
And
guide in that capacity, in a way.
I guess so.
Wow, super cool.
But she explains that at this time, when that time comes, I will be adept in Seidr, and that she would be guiding me to all the resources. So partially, I've been guided to some resources that started the basics of it all, but she taught me the complexities, where she like directed me one-on-one with the process.
Simply amazing. So that was okay. So thank you for explaining that. I'm overwhelmed in a way, but also I'm sad to say that we have to end the show. And so I definitely want to invite you back again, because I know we've only just skimmed the surface, but yet we covered a lot of ground. And I hope everyone has found this as fascinating as I have. I'm fairly certain they have, looking at the comments popping up. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on today. This was great. So you'll have to come on another Thursday, because I know weekends don't work for you. But
Yeah.
So we'll just get that penciled in now. I mean, after the show. Awesome. Thank you so much, Christian, and thank you everybody else for joining us today. Just a note that my regular time is Saturdays, every other Saturday from noon to 1:30. The next show is, I think, the 22nd. I don't have my calendar in front of me. Chris Hoffman. It's going to be another awesome show. And so please join me then. But then also the first Thursday of the month, I'm going to start doing these special editions instead of the Thread Theory that I was doing. So hope you join us then too. Okay. Thank you again, Christian. Thanks everyone for joining us. And we'll see you in a week and a half, or else in a month. All right.
All right. Bye.
Bye.